this one. Here, you're on.
Good afternoon, everyone. This week's parsha of Tetzaveh deals with the big day kahuna, of the garments that the Kohanim wore in the Mishkan and later in the Beit HaMikdash. And the expression is that clothes make the man. So in the first Beit HaMikdash, the time of the Mishkan, and from Moshe till the Churban Bayis Rishon, so the Kohanim were installed in the kahuna by having themselves anointed with the Shemen HaMishcha, the special oil that was prepared by Moshe that was used to consecrate the Mishkan, all of the kelim of the Mishkan, all of the utensils, to dedicate it for the holy purpose for which it was created. And that oil, I don't know how much oil it was, but according to the Talmud, that oil lasted throughout, we're talking at least 850 years. And that is how the Kohen was installed. The Kohen Gadol was installed in the Beit HaMikdash. And that is what gave them, so to speak, their official inauguration and the ability to perform the avodah. Now, the concept that we have, it exists in the secular world as well, that when a person achieves an office, that person is inaugurated into the office. So either by taking an oath, by a public ceremony, by an address to the people, but there has to be something. It just doesn't happen without some formal form of inauguration. And that we see from the Mishkan as well, that the formality of installing the Kohanim was necessary in order to consecrate them for the avodah, for the service in the temple, and for being the agents of the Jewish people, etc. In the Bayis Sheni, the oil was no longer there. It was one of the things that was missing. The Bayis Sheni didn't have the eternal light. It didn't have the Holy Ark. The Bayis Sheni no longer had prophecy. And one of the things that also was missing was the oil. So then how could you install the Kohen? So the Talmud tells us they were installed by wearing the begodim, by wearing the uniform, so to speak. And we have that also in general life. When the Israeli army, they give you the beret or something. If I give you the uniform and you put it on, so that means that you're installed. That means that you're officially trusted with the mission that's being given to you. So the Kohanim, their begodim, that was how they were installed. The other way that they were installed, as the Gemara explains, is avodoson mechanchoson, by doing the work, by serving in the Beis HaMikdash. That also was the completion of their inauguration, so to speak. And then they were consecrated to do the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash. There were 24 families of the Kohanim, and each of the families worked 2 weeks a year. Some worked 3 weeks a year to get it to 52 weeks. And for the holidays, for the Yom Tovim, when, so to speak, the Beis Hamikdash was overly busy, so then all the Kohanim came to participate. So the clothing that they wore had a dramatic effect, because that's what made him a Kohen. That's what gave him the stature and the status. So there were 4 basic garments of the Kohen, which every Kohen wore, whether he was the Kohen Hedyot, meaning the regular plain Kohen, or whether he was the Kohen Gadol, the great high priest. Those 4 garments were ketonet. So the ketonet is, it's more than a shirt, it's a tunic. It was a long shirt, covered most of his body. And it was made of white linen. And it was tashbeitz. It was made out of squares. And that's where you have the Hebrew word for a crossword puzzle. Is a tashbeitz, because it's little squares. So that was the pattern of the tunic of the ketonet that he wore. Ketonet tashbeitz, made out of little squares, so it was like white on white, we would say today, if we wanted to describe it. And it was made of linen. And it had sleeves, and it covered his body practically to the knees, some would say even below the knees. So it was the overgarment as well. It had an avneit. The second garment was a belt. The belt was made out of shatnez. And we find throughout the Torah that it's the Torah deals with opposites. You shouldn't say that shatnez is bad luck, or it's superstition, or it's something to be afraid of. Shatnez, wool and linen together in the same garment that warms the person, is an Isur that the Torah told us, for whatever reason it told it to us. It's a chok. So then you would say, well, anybody, the Torah warned it because it's not healthy. It has negative magical powers. Whatever, there's a problem with it. So the Torah said, no, you'll see that the Kohen, the belt that he wore, had wool and linen together. It had tchelet, which always is woolen, and sheish, which is linen. And then it's a mitzvah to wear it. So again, it's to reinforce this concept that the mitzvahs are what God told us to do, and not to ascribe to them reasons that are beyond our understanding or logic. That's one of the great disputes that exists, whether or not one should even engage in ta'amei mitzvot, in giving reasons for mitzvahs. So there are many sforim by great people that have Tamei HaMitzvot, right? The Sefer HaChinuch is a whole encyclopedia of Tamei HaMitzvot. The Rambam also delved into Tamei HaMitzvot, especially in the Moreh Nevuchim, and tried to explain every mitzvah, why. But there were those that opposed that whole stream, that whole attempt. They said that because at the end of the day, you have to say we're doing it because the Lord commanded us to do it. We're doing the Ratzon Hashem. We're doing the will of God. We don't know what the particular reason for this mitzvah is, but nevertheless, we perform it because of the fact Asher kitshonu b'mitzvosav v'tzivonu. He commanded us. That's the bracha we make on every mitzvah. Even on mitzvahs d'Rabbanan, like we're going to have now Purim. And because of that, therefore, the problem of Tamei HaMitzvos over the ages has always been a problem. So when Reform and others came along and they said, well, the reason for the mitzvah was this and this and this, but that reason is gone. So therefore, we don't have to do it anymore. Well, with that attitude, it doesn't take long and the whole thing falls apart. And there are no mitzvahs that are left. So we had the shirt, the ktonet, tashbeitz, and we had the avneit. Then the Kohen wore pants, michasayim, which were like knickers to the knee. And his tunic came over the pants, over the trousers that he wore. And the fourth basic garment was a hat, a turban. And the turban was made out of one piece of linen, but it was rolled in such a way that it became a turban on the head. Now, during the time of the Beit HaMikdash, the Kohanim wore tefillin all day. So the turban had to be fitted to accommodate the Makom HaTefillin. Later, the custom became that it became impossible for us to wear tefillin all day and afford them the respect and cleanliness that is involved. So then it became restricted only to prayers, shachris, sometimes mincha, etc. So those were the four garments of the Kohen Hedyot. And the Kohen Gadol wore those four garments as well. But he had four more garments that he wore. One was the ephod. Now the ephod was a long apron-like garment, very colorful pattern. It had two straps that held it. It went on top of the ktonet and on top of the pants. We have here the famous Rashi about the ephod. Rashi says he doesn't know what the ephod was. He doesn't have a tradition. But he said, Libi Omerli. My heart tells me that this is what it was. And he says, it's like the apron that the noble women wear when they ride their horses so that the mud shouldn't splatter on their clothing. So they wear an apron, a leather apron on top, that keeps their clothing clean. There's a famous legend about this. Legends aren't necessarily accurate, but they characterize people, right? So the legend is that Rashi was sitting in his Beis Medrash in Troyes, learning, teaching, and outside there was a big clatter of hooves as a whole bunch of noblemen and noble women rode by. So Rashi rose to close the shutters so that he would not be disturbed by the clatter outside. And when he walked to the shutters and he looked outside, he saw the noblewoman wearing this apron. So he said to himself, why does God show me a woman on a horse wearing an apron? In Mitten Tesvis, right? He says it must be that that was the ephod. And therefore he says, Libi Omerli, my heart tells me that this is what the ephod looked like. And that's why and then from heaven they wanted to show me what it looked like. So they showed me this woman riding on a horse. The ephod had 2 large diamonds on the shoulder pads, on which the names of the Jewish tribes were engraved, and Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and it said Kol Shifte Yeshurim, and it was part of the Urim V'Tumim. Then there was the Choshen, which was attached to the ephod, which was the breastplate, which had 12 precious stones, one for each of the tribes of Israel. And on the stones was inscribed the name of the tribe. And then it was like a folded. And inserted in the fold was the Shem Hashem, God's name. And that activated, that was the battery, so to speak, that activated during V'Tumim, that when they were at the Kohen and the Navi, when he was asked, what does God think about it, so to speak, so then the letters lit up and he knew how to read it, to put it together, and that would be the answer that they wanted. So that was the Choshen and the ephod. Yesterday I discussed with you the Me'il, the famous Balaturim regarding the Me'il, the overcoat, which was sleeveless, full length, and had bells at the bottom, Nishma Kolo V'Vo El HaKodesh. And then the fourth of the extra garments of the Kohen Gadol was that he had a golden plate on his forehead, attached in back, with threads of tchelis, and on it said Kodesh LaHashem, sanctified to God, with God's name spelled out on it. So Machlokes in the Meforshim, how whether it was written in 1 line or it was written in 2 lines, but certainly the Shem was larger than the word Kodesh. And so he wore that, so he wore 8 garments. There were 4 regular garments of the Kohen Hedyot, plus the 4 garments of the Kohen Gadol. And that was called the Big Day Zohav. And on Yom Kippur, he changed 5 times. Sometimes he wore, for certain of the services, the Big Day Zohav. And sometimes he wore the Big Day Lavan, only the 4 garments, the white garments that he had. So that was the uniform of the Kohanim, and that's what's described for us in this week's Parsha. Rabbi Chananya ben Akash Omer Ratzak HaKadosh Baruch Hu L'Zakos Yisrael V'ficha Chiver Lahem Torah Mitzvot Shenemar Adonai Chafetz Aman Tzidko Yagdil Torah V'Yadir.